Next up, Eric Muntz is going to speak to us about simple processes to ensure users trust your applications. I think this is a great 1-2 punch. We go from ethical design to trust. And I'll just leave it at that and hand it over to Eric.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first international conference ever. My first time to Switzerland. And like Dan said earlier, I'm totally falling in love with Zurich. It is amazing. I really, really appreciate you all having me. And it's just been a great time. So here we go. Just a quick intro on me. Eric Muntz is my name. I'm the VP of Product at MailChimp, which at MailChimp means that I run the team with all the developers and designers that build our application. I'm going to be talking about process. I have a background in software development, not front-end development, sorry. Don't throw tomatoes at me. My background is mainly in embedded, mobile, and desktop development. I started doing back-end development just before coming to MailChimp about 5 years ago. I am constantly learning. My job as VP of Product at MailChimp is to make sure that our processes are in place for our developers to be able to empower our users as simply and easily as possible. And a quick warning, I am not a designer. Laura's presentation was beautiful and amazing. Mine will be offensive to your eyes. Sorry about that. We have designers at MailChimp who are phenomenal, but I feel like I'd be faking it if I had them design my slides for me. So it's going to be black and white. Here we go. Another quick about MailChimp. We're an email marketing software company. We are in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. We currently have 425 employees, all of which are in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Probably my favorite thing is that we're self-funded and we're profitable. So I like to say that we don't negotiate with terrorists. As Laura mentioned earlier about VC funding and what that does to your company, we don't really have that. We control our own destiny, which means we get to build our own processes. Pretty much all of our processes around caring about our users. I also added one extra thing in here that I think is a great little accident. But our core company values are humility, creativity, and independence. And I absolutely love that that's HCI. Right? Because we focus so much on the human-computer interaction that it just is this great little happy accident that our values turn out that way. So I'm going to start by walking through a little bit of history. I started at MailChimp in February of 2010. I was the third engineer. At that time, we had 300,000 users and very, very, very little process. We would release just whenever we were ready. We didn't have staging environments. We didn't have a QA team. And we were starting to lose the trust of our users. Because every time we pushed out new code, there would be massive bugs. I'll show some great screenshots of the massive bugs later. So we added a very little bit of process, and we stuck with it. Just a little itty-bitty bit of process. And then in 5 years, we've gone to 8 million active users. We went from sending 565 million emails to sending 11.9 billion emails. This is just in July of 2010 versus July of 2015. So last month we sent 11.9 billion individual emails. We served just under 1 billion requests, unique requests. So these are requests when we deliver an email and people open it. It's opens tracking. If they click on it, it's also users in the front end of our application. So just under 1 billion then. Last month, 10.1 billion. We had about 100 servers at the time. I'm not going to get too much into server stuff. If you want to talk about it later, come grab me because I will geek out on server things with you. We had about 100, and now we manage about 1,000. Back then we had a product team of 5 folks. We had 2 front-end developers and 3 back-end developers. And now we've got about 20. These numbers aren't to be all braggy and boasty. I think this is probably considered medium scale. It is not Facebook or Google. But what I love about it is that we're able to do this for our users with very, very minimal process, right? So in software, lately we've been talking about the minimum viable product. It's a phrase that I actually don't remember exactly who invented it, but I know that Eric Ries of Lean Software really popularized it, right? It's a really great concept. It's all about finding the minimum piece of software that you can build to get in front of users and get your product and your company going. It's really great. It's been super, super helpful for the community. It's been super helpful for developers. It's been super helpful for our users. The problem that I find is that we focus on the minimum viable product, but then we go and build it either with absolutely no process or with huge, massive enterprise-grade process. Just super, super, super massive. So my question is, what about the minimum viable process? Is there a process that's just super lean and will work for you and your organization to make sure your users are happy and your users trust your product? Now, a little caveat, this is not one size fits all. For those of you who are old enough like me to have seen this movie, this is Tommy Boy from the 90s. The funny bit here is that, you know, he's a big man in a little coat, and eventually he flexes and rips the coat apart. I think that's actually a really good metaphor for using process that doesn't fit you, right? You put the process on and it just rips apart. It's either going to rip your team apart, rip your users apart, rip your products apart. It's going to be bad. So the reason I'm saying it's not one size fits all is I don't want to sit up here and preach and force on all of you, go back and use the process that we use because it works for us, so it has to work for you. You need to find out what works for you and just stick with that. But always be willing to adapt. So why have process at all? Why even bother? Maybe you don't need it. Maybe when you're just starting up, process isn't important. The reasons I believe that we need to have some process is to maintain your company and department's core values and to ensure trust. So I believe really strongly, I've been geeking out a lot about trust lately. I believe really strongly that when a user agrees to sign up, join, use your product, that they have formed a trust relationship with you. They trust that you are going to stay relevant. For us, that means as email moves forward, we need to stay relevant. Right? If new clients come out, new protocols come out, whatever it is, we need to stay relevant with that. Our users are trusting us to do that. There's more to it, though. They're also trusting that your product is going to be accurate, that when they use it and it's giving you metrics, statistics, sending emails to people all across the globe, whatever your product is doing, it needs to be accurate. It also needs to be performant. So when a user goes and tests your product and determines whether they want to use your product or all of the competitors, because let's face it, nothing is unique in software. They have chosen you over others because somewhere along the way they trusted you were going to be right for them. There's another little bit that I think falls out of trust that I also think is really important because I'm Mr. Managery Man now, but is the trust that employees have in your team when they join your company. Right? They trust their skills are going to stay relevant. They trust that what you say are your core values are actually how you're going to run the company. Right? If you say, we believe in work-life balance, and they get there and you don't at all, you've broken trust. Right? So for me, the reason to have process is to make sure you're sticking to your core values and you're adhering to and maintaining trust, both with your users, with your staff. So the process that we use at MailChimp, it's Agile, but with a lowercase a. I like to make that distinction because I think Agile is actually massive, right? It's funny that it's called Agile because it's no longer actually Agile. But the distinction of the lowercase a means that we basically take parts of Agile that we think work for us and we adhere to them. So some of the huge, massive things in Agile, all the Scrum Masters and meetings and user cards and story cards and everything that goes into it, we take the things that we like out of that and we kind of implement them on our own. What's funny is, I believe my colleagues are going to watch this later. It's like 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning back on the East Coast of the United States. This is probably the first time you've even heard me say we're agile. So I get some Rotten Tomatoes thrown at me when I get back to the States. But it's with a lowercase a. So what that means for us is we have really small project teams with 2 to 5 individuals. You can only think of one project we've done that actually had 5. The majority of the time it's 2 or 3. And they're multidisciplinary. So we will figuratively and sometimes literally take a front-end designer, back-end developer, stick them in a room, give them autonomy to solve a project, and go. Sometimes it's a QA member and a front-end developer. It all depends on the needs of the project. We give those teams really, really broad requirements. So sticking to our core values of independence and creativity, we don't want to stifle creativity on solving problems for our users. So we tell these little small project teams, here's kind of a broad stroke of what we want. You figure out exactly how it works. I said requirements. What do we do for requirements? We actually use the design and prototypes as requirements. We think that if you're spending a ton of time building requirements documents, they're going to be obsolete the minute a front-end developer gets in there and realizes that none of it really matched. And then you're going to have a document that you have to go and update. And then you're going to release, and you're going to make changes because you have to listen to your users and you got to change really, really quickly. So if we're writing requirements documents and really caring so much about defining strictly everything that we're doing, we actually end up moving slowly, stifling independence, stifling creativity. So use the design and the prototypes. That's the loose requirements. One of the other things is that we don't have any product or project managers. That usually shocks people when we're in interviews or when we're out around talking. I've actually realized that that's not the case. Reality is that everyone on our team is a product manager and everyone on our team is a project manager. Part of our team's responsibilities when we list it out is we say, if you're a front-end developer, you're going to write code, you're going to do some design, you're going to care about the user experience, and you're going to do product management and project management. That, again, goes back to the core value of independence. It also goes back to creativity because it's kind of forcing you to have to be creative in how you solve problems and how you think. No code monkeys. This is not UML diagrams and you just make it syntactically correct. We do assign on every project a directly responsible individual. I actually stole this term from Google. What that essentially means is that on any one of these projects, there's one person who's a tiebreaker, right? They have to work very closely with everyone on the project, but when there's a conflict or something needs to be resolved, the directly responsible individual is the one who makes the decision. So here's my favorite example of a small project team having built something. Maybe 2.5 or 3 years ago, we completely rebuilt our editor. Our editor was kind of old and archaic, and we built a drag and drop version of it. We stuck 4 people in a room, this time literally, and we gave them a really broad brushstroke. In fact, we said, drag and drop. And they said, eh? Drag what and drop it where? And we were like, yes! So they started looking around, figuring out how they could take our current editor and make it more friendly for users. We weren't even prescriptive really that much on drag and drop. But what they came up with was this, I think, pretty phenomenal editor. So how do we make this work? Right? If we have a bunch of small teams, we give independence to, we tell them to be creative, we assign one person responsible for it, sounds like we're setting up for chaos. We kind of are. But there's some core building blocks that we put in place to make sure that this actually works for our users and continues maintaining trust. The biggest of which is a staging environment. Crazy enough, on that slide from 2010, we didn't have a staging environment. The first time code hit production was the first time code hit production. Not super fun. Things happened like that. I really wish that that was a fake screenshot. I really wish I was making this up. In fact, I wish it only happened once. It happened several times. So for us, there's things we do in production that we don't do in development, right? We compile CSS. We actually compile images. We concatenate them together and build sprites and do all kinds of crazy stuff. We do all of that because we want our users to have a great experience. We stick all of that in front of a content delivery network. We use a tool called Akamai for content delivery. We don't do that in development. That'd be way too slow. So we've had times where we pushed to production and we had a slightly misconfigured file somewhere, and Akamai said, I'm not serving that. And our users saw this. Or they saw well-designed MailChimp and they couldn't click on anything because all of the JavaScript was totally broken. One of the other problems we had is we use less for CSS. Sorry. We didn't know it was going to be obsolete the minute we used it. Probably should have. Welcome to development. But the compiler that we were using in our local development environments was not the compiler that our deployer was using to compile less into CSS. And things went crazy, cuckoo, haywire. Good times. So the must-haves for a staging environment, it has to actually mirror production. It can't be close to production, sort of like production. It has to legitimately mirror production. We even went as far as making individual shards in our staging environment. So MailChimp's heavily sharded. How many of you use MailChimp? Probably should have started with that. Yay, thank you, you're awesome. When you log into MailChimp, you may see a suffix in your domain that says US and then a number. US1 is our first one, and all the way up to 11 now. And that sharding creates some issues, right? If you have to bounce between one shard to another, or you release to one shard and you've yet to release to another, we actually treat login as a separate shard. Because we do that, we may not deploy to login at the same time we're deploying to all of the other shards. So we need to make sure we're testing that in stage. So our staging environment has 4 shards. It has a login and then 3 user shards. The other thing I highly recommend that I wish we were doing, we're not doing it yet though, is really using a staging environment for real users. What I'd like to do is have all internal MailChimp accounts using Stage, right? So that we can push code to it, leave it there for a couple of days, send campaigns, market our app, do things, and see what's going to break before our users actually go and hit it. I have a little side project because I'm a baseball freak called Box Score Mania. If you like baseball, go sign up. They even play baseball here. But I have a great friend who uses it, and he's on my staging environment, right? I find a sacrificial lamb, I send him off to the slaughter, and anytime I push code, he's there testing it for me. Super, super, super useful. So we also found that we have to have release cycles. When I first started, it was just, when we're ready to cut a release and it seems marketable, we'll do it. That really hurt with project scoping. You're all developers. You know what happens when you start getting to work on a project. You just want to add more and more and more and more and more. And then the marketing team or the sales team comes in and they want to add more and more and more and more and more. We found that we had to agree up front, no, we are going to cut a release, and this is the date, and we can descope whatever doesn't get in by that date and add it shortly after. So our release cycles are 5 weeks long. We actually build into our release cycle 4 separate phases. There's research, design, and implementation. And then there's maintenance. So the maintenance phase is kind of always ongoing, mixed in with other projects. Again, works for us. Think Tommy Boy, may not work for you. But these are things we were able to do within a single release cycle. We went from that to that. Which you're actually not seeing here, which I probably should have put in here, is that this was totally not responsive. If you tried to view this on your phone or a smaller device, it would look like a jumbled, horrible, awful version of that. This went responsive. And I'm showing the marketing site, but the actual application went through the exact same process. If you log into MailChimp on your phone, it's responsive. In that instance, the reason I'm using that example is that didn't fit into a 5-week release cycle. But we knew we had to do it, and it was something that you just had to cut and do once. So it fit into about 2.5 release cycles. But that's the thing, be flexible, right? It's not one size fits all for a company. It's not one size fits all for a project. Here's another thing we just did. This did fit into a release cycle. I absolutely love this because interns did it. And it shows to me that our process and the way we do things works really, really well. If a couple college kids can come in 3 months and build something in 1 cycle. The other thing I think is a very, very important building block is quality assurance. I think this GIF explains a lot. This is just one of my absolute favorites. This is totally how I feel when I go from testing my own code and then I hand it off. Right? And look at the smirk the big brother has right at the end. He's so happy. Oh yeah. If you haven't seen DevOps reactions on Tumblr, go and spend weeks on there just laughing because it's absolutely amazing. But QA can be tough, right? Because they're going to do this. They're going to absolutely bash your Spider-Man to death. We do QA a little bit differently, though. Partially because we don't believe in huge requirement documents. We want our QA team to test like users, because users are who we care about, not our requirements. So our QA team doesn't do things like take 4 Wikipedia page and stick it into a text field that's supposed to be your first name. Because users don't do that, right? If they do and it breaks, say, don't do that. It's pretty simple. The other great thing is that our testers, when they test like users, we give our QA team full power. They're also product managers, right? They're not just some second-class citizens, some team that's going to come and fight with developers to have arguments. They're product managers. They know our users. They love our users. Most of our QA team came from support, right? So they know what's going to confuse users and cause problems. So when our QA team says, this is confusing, this doesn't match our patterns, this doesn't match the way we do things, we listen. We trust them massively. It's the first place I've ever worked where QA and development are like kumbaya, arm in arm. It's awesome. So there's a couple rules that I also think are really, really helpful for having teams like this, and definitely for maintaining trust. The biggest one for me is never hide a problem. And that goes for everything. If your product's broken, if you're a back-end developer and you notice that billing failed overnight, don't just sweep it under the rug and rerun it. Make sure everybody knows. If you failed your users, apologize to them. If they find out you failed them and you knew and you didn't apologize, trust is gone, right? Problems decrease trust. A lack of acknowledgement of problems completely erode trust. So here's an example. My worst day ever. In 2011, I pushed a little bit of code that cached list forms. So for those of you who use MailChimp, these are the forms that you would build to accept subscribers either on your website or on MailChimp's hosted forms. And I got a little over-aggressive with wiping the cache. So anytime you made a change and you saved it, I said, ha 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 ha, let's erase all these changes. Back to vanilla. So I found this out. It was probably a day after I pushed the code. I went and looked to see if we had backups. Murphy's Law, we didn't. So the number of users who possibly would have been affected was anyone who saved a form in the last day. So starting my worst day ever, I run a script to figure out how many users that is and hope it comes up with 100. And I watch a screen fly by like the Matrix. It was unbelievable. The final number was 24,000. Victory! So our CEO got to send this email to our users. We broke something. Sorry. If it affected you, we'll make it right. We do a really good job with humor and with talking to our customers. So our CEO did an amazing job in this email. He dubbed it the Fontpocalypse. So I am the horseman of the Fontpocalypse. But what happened, it turned out fine. In fact, this is a website one of our users put up saying, this is how you apologize. When you break something, this is what you do. He included copies of the email. He just gushed on and on and on. That's a user whose trust we could have completely lost. And instead, he's advocating for MailChimp because we owned up to my massive, horrible screw-up. Which brings me to rule number 2. Learn from your mistakes. Never waste a crisis. So what I did after that was wrote some unit tests, which have failed since. Yes, it caught a disaster. But you're going to make mistakes. It's a given. Software is hard. How many times a day when you're building software do you say, really? We're still here? Ah! Tripping over chairs. You know, I really have to do all this work. I'm still here as a developer. You're going to make mistakes, particularly if you're moving quickly and you do things kind of the way we do, where we have really short release cycles and move quickly. So what are the challenges in having a team work this way? One of our biggest challenges is communication. Right now we have 5, 6, 7 individual project teams. They're all working on the same release cycle. And we don't have a single project manager or product manager. So communication is really, really tough. We need to make sure that all those teams are talking to each other and making sure that they're working toward all the right things. The other part is that asking that much of your developers and your designers, it's a lot. It's a stressful gig. So we also build in downtime. We have project teams that are research teams. We say, hey, just go and research. Greenfield project, go and figure out, I don't know, drag and drop things. And they can spend a full release cycle just working on something new. Hopefully that something new will turn into something awesome. But they have permission to fail, because if they do, we'll own it. We won't hide the problem. We won't pretend it didn't happen. The other part is hiring can be really tough. You have to hire multidisciplinary folks, people who really want to take deep ownership. Those who do, it works mega, mega, mega perfectly for. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't want to be a project manager, I want to be a developer. Or I don't want to do product management. I want to get the specs from someone else and go and implement them. There's nothing wrong with that. But it does make it a little tough. Wow, looks like I talked really quickly. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. That was fantastic. I've been a MailChimp fan for as long as I can remember. I've even done template designs a handful of years ago for it. So I'm a massive fan of how MailChimp works, and from what I see on the outside, and what I also know from Aaron Walter and some of the other folks that I know there. So it's fantastic to actually hear some of this process. You might have caught me grinning a lot at things you were saying, because some of this stuff, like especially things like Agile not being Agile for the most part. I mean, this is I rail about this stuff like on and on and on for years to clients and other companies that I work with. We have time for questions, so get those hands like exercised so we can get them up. Who's going to be first? I mean, because if no one is, I will. Oh, Laura, nice. And we've got number 2 over there. Go ahead. I'm going to repeat the question.
Sure.
For the, so the question is, how do they communicate? Basically, just how they communicate. How do wires not get crossed?
Yep. So that's something we are actively working on. We use Basecamp for the research phase. So there's a lot of discussion going on in Basecamp. Research and design phases, we actually use Basecamp. We have meetings where all of the directly responsible individuals get together and talk about, problems and schedules and what's coming up. We rely heavily on tooling. So we use Pivotal Tracker, though we just rip out all of the agile parts of it. We actually estimate everything really high, so it thinks our velocity is like infinity, just because that's awesome. So, we use email, we use chat, we use meetings. What's hilarious is there's a video on our jobs page about what's great about working at MailChimp. And I'm on there a year ago saying we have no meetings. That has changed. We have meetings. We have quite a few now. The other thing is that we're an open-spaced environment, yet with small project rooms. So project teams sit together, or they sit collectively. And that's been one of our biggest challenges, moving from 30 people to 400 people. So communication just happened because you were next to them. Now communication has to happen because it's part of your process. Can I answer it?
That's fantastic. You've taken words straight from a presentation I gave a couple of years ago about scaling teams.
Sweet.
Like, that's the way to do it. Everyone be like MailChimp. Small teams really are the solution to communications problems and to efficiency. Then you end up getting your teams working like startups, where everyone knows what's going on, everyone's responsible, everyone's invested, everyone has autonomy. I love it. Next question over there, sir. So the question is, how did you manage the growth of the process inside the team, or the growth of the team along with the process? Both of those things together. Yeah, I guess, those things were happening concurrently. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, so the biggest way we managed it was with transparency. So we made sure everyone knew what we were trying to accomplish, and that we didn't know what we were doing. And making sure that we were all talking about it. This isn't, I came down from high and said, here's what we're going to do process-wise. We tried a few things that failed. In fact, I don't want to say it and offend too many folks, but Basecamp is failing for us right now. It's pretty tough when you've got a ton of projects. So we're still working on that. The other hardest part there was that we hired really, really, really talented technicians. And we kept doing that without hiring really, really talented managers. And really, really talented technicians don't always want to be managers, and they probably shouldn't if they don't want to be. So we've been actively trying to find managers. One of the great things we did as a culture is we had some professors from a nearby school called Emory in Atlanta, from their business school, come and watch MailChimp. And they spent 6 months just watching. And then they put together a program called MailChimp University, where they teach up-and-coming managers how to be managers. They teach you about communication and professional work ethics, all of that. And that's been really, really helpful for making sure that the process works, because we end up with managers who are invested in being managers and invested in MailChimp and our way of doing things. And it's actually worked really, really well telling technicians that you don't have to be a manager, right? You're going to still get paid well. Everything's going to increase. Everything's going to be better. But really, it's just be transparent about what you're trying to do. Don't be afraid to fail. If it's failing, change it. Does that make sense?
I think it says a lot that when you had that that particular failure that you talked about, the CEO was the one who wrote the email that went out to the customers. The impression I've always got from MailChimp is that it's a very top-down. All companies are. Like, if the person at the top has ethics and morals and cares about the users, everyone else below them will. But it's a perfect example of that, where he's not just doing it from on high either. He's involved. That's fantastic. Do we have time for one more question? Who's it going to be? Yes, sir. Could you just repeat the last part of it? I didn't quite hear. Got it. So yeah, the question is, how much work have you done behind the scenes on that kind of the way you treat users and the way you treat their data and the way that you respect them on the things the level that they can't see?
Yeah, so data collection and data selling and the users actually being the data is the question. But we're pretty transparent about it. And another part of her talk there is that if you don't know where the money's coming from, right, it's you. MailChimp doesn't have VC funding. We have a lot of users, a lot of small businesses. They're keeping the lights on. So we don't need to sell user data. And internally, yeah, we have a data science team that's working on seeing what happens in the email ecosystem. What's interesting for us is that we actually have 2 levels of users, and we need to be responsible to both of them. So we have our users, then we have their users, right? So their subscribers. And we try to make sure from all aspects that we're being really, really responsible to both our users and their subscribers. A feature that people have asked for a ton from MailChimp is, I give you my email address, show me all the lists I'm on and how I got there and all of that. That's actually problematic for us because we're so careful with our users' data that going from the subscriber back up a level is really, really difficult. We've actually put silos in between all of that. All of our data is accessed at the user level. So we can see him and his subscribers, but we can't easily turn his subscribers into all the users that are also associated with them.
That's a pretty good answer to a complicated question.
Email's really hard, and protecting users, from the baddies is really, really tough, but it's a thing we care a lot about.
It sounds like it's something you do take very seriously, and that's not a surprise, really. I'm sure you'll be around for lunch. Lunches are actually our next thing. So we don't have to switch rooms right now, other than switching to the lunch room. Actually, we can do a couple more questions. I was just kind of in militant, I'm on the clock, I'm watching the timing thing. So if we have a choice, basically, if we have 1 or 2 more questions, we definitely have time for it because we're just going up to lunch. It's going to be really relaxed. Lunch doesn't start for another 15 minutes. Or you can just kind of chill out, go get more coffee, make a phone call, have a cigarette, whatever it is you're waiting eagerly to do. If a hand shoots up, we will do a question. More. See? This is good. You've already asked one. I'll come back to you. Where was the one in the back? Yes, sir. So that question is, especially for startups, I guess, what should come first, minimal viable process or minimal viable product? Is there a first, second, or is it
I think
mixed together?
That's probably a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem. But I would argue that the very first thing that should come is users. Users. Go get some users. If that means that you don't have any process, that's fine. Go get some users. The moment that you have some users, put some process in place so that you don't lose their trust. So I guess I would say the product would come first, but I think the process has to come really, really, really quickly thereafter. But I think the very first thing you should do is get users. Get users. You have no idea what to build without them. And you have no one's trust to keep without them.
Nice. Laura? Yeah, was that almost a round of applause? Or is it just someone creaking? I wanted to clap. Laura? How do you pick the right people?
I think it's time for lunch.
I'm just going to give the mic to Laura to draw.
That is really, really, really hard. The first thing that I think is important is that our HR team, our recruiting team, really very deeply understands our culture and values it. And they know how to screen for culture. They actually understand our developers more than any recruiting team I've ever worked with. They kind of can look at someone's profile and talk to them for a few minutes and get whether they're like us, one of us. The other bit is that we make sure that other departments are meeting with candidates because of all of the autonomy and independence that we really, really value. Those people are going to have to work with other departments, right? So we make sure that the other departments give a thumbs up and we'll sign off on it.
So that speaks to a second layer of trust. The whole presentation is about trust with your users in the product and your process, but really that has to exist within the company as well in order to have that level of autonomy.
Absolutely.
You have to trust each other to hire people you trust.
Absolutely, and we all really, really do trust each other. If the support team says there's a bug that we need fixed, they speak up and say it, we fix it, because we trust that our support team knows what's happening with our users. It's the same with the example of QA. We hugely, strongly trust them. We trust our marketing team. Everyone trusts each other. It's pretty great.
Brilliant. Okay,
trust.
You laugh, but how many of you are in an environment where you feel that exists?
All right.
That's a pretty good show of hands. If this were the U.S. in general, that would not have happened.
Yeah.
You know this. Yeah. But that's also that wasn't even a quarter of the people here. I mean, it's not a common thing where you just know that if someone tells you something, you should listen to them. You don't have to be skeptical. I think that must be an amazing environment. When are you opening up MailChimp Zurich? No?
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
We actually have a saying about kind of the right candidate, and it's someone who will pick up the trash. Right? So if there's a piece of trash laying down, you just kind of step over it and move along. Not for us, but if you see the piece of trash and you'll pick it up and own it and find a receptacle for it, that's what we're looking for.
It's a very interesting thing. Before I'm going to let everyone go to lunch here, just so we maybe you'll beat the other room. We'll get up there first and be in line first. The one thing that's why I was so quick. The big thing that I see in common with companies like MailChimp and in my research into the growth of teams and company culture, companies like Apple and Disney actually do exactly the same kind of thing as far as who they hire. They hire people who are the right fit more than they hire skill sets that are the right fit. They'd rather have the person that grows into something useful and valuable because they know they're the right kind of personality. And things like someone who will pick up the trash. I work part-time at Disney in my life as a singer. Ask me later. And one of the very first things they teach you in the first course, the first day of work, which is training, everyone is mixed in together. There's no hierarchy. You're all at the same tables, whether you're a manager or a janitor or a chef or a dancer or a singer, whatever it is. And they even teach you how to pick up the trash if you see it. Like, it is everyone's responsibility. User experience at the parks is everyone's responsibility, and it flows throughout the entire company. And it's one of those unique things that companies like that excel to a great extent, and MailChimp as well. It's something really interesting to see. It's cultural throughout. It's not just about the job you do. It's down to the people who will take care of the office and pick up the trash. That's fantastic.
I actually have a really, really good note that just reminded me of that we have on the development team. We've started maybe a little over a year ago an apprenticeship program that anyone from in the company who wants to be a developer and has started growing skills, that they can interview for an apprenticeship, and then they work on the development team. They work for 3 months. They're given a real, honest-to-God project. And at the end of the apprenticeship, both sides agree whether they want to stay on the development team. And it's great because we know that the people who are working there and are successful fit the culture. And then they're going to come over and become developers and help us work. And we've had 4 apprentices. We've even had one person who said, development's not for me, and went back to his other job, which I think is fantastic, right? We keep the job open for the person who comes in to try it out. And it's worked extraordinarily well for us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eric. Big round of applause for Eric.